All right, it is 6 o'clock, so let's get started, shall we? Welcome, everyone. My name is Kessel John, and I'm with ERG, a contractor supporting this meeting. I will be your Zoom host for this meeting, so I'm going to go over some housekeeping and logistics interpretation. Interpretation logistics, let's do it that way. So this meeting is available with interpretation into ASL, or American Sign Language, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Haitian Creole, and Vietnamese. You can use the globe icon or the interpretation feature indicated by the globe icon in your Zoom control panel to select your preferred language when I open up the interpretation. English speakers should select English so they can hear any translated comments. I'm now going to hand it over to Jose, who will go through these instructions with our interpreters.
Thank you, Kessel. I will introduce each interpreter and their language one at a time. Vietnamese, Dan, please go.
Để tham gia vào phòng tiếng Việt, xin vui lòng chọn biểu tượng thông dịch và nhấn tiếng Việt. Cảm ơn. Vietnamese complete.
Haitian Creole, Kelly.
Bonjour tout le monde. Pour participer à la réunion à créole haïtien, puis wap cliquer sur l'icône interprétation et puis wap choisir langue créole haïtien. Merci à pile tout le monde.
Spanish, Mariana.
Buenas tardes, soy Mariana y con mi compañero José estaremos haciendo la interpretación al español. Para participar en español, haga clic en el icono Interpretación y seleccione el canal de español.
Portuguese, Barbara.
Para participar da interpretação em português, clique no ícone de interpretação e selecione Português. Português complete.
Mandarin, Gladys.
大家晚上好，如果大家呢想以这个普通话参加会议的话，请点击这个的口语的图标，并且选择普通话。谢谢。
Thank you very much, Kessel. We're done.
All right, now that our interpreters have explained what's happening, I'm going to launch the interpretation rooms. All right, so now you should see a globe icon and you can choose whichever interpretation room that you need. Now on to Zoom housekeeping. First of all, as I mentioned before, please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted at a later date. All right, closed captioning is auto-generated, and if you can use it by clicking on the CC icon in your Zoom control panel. If you don't see the CC icon immediately, if you click on the more indicated with 3 dots, you should find it there. If you would like to use telephone audio for this meeting, please click on the small arrow next to the microphone icon, select Switch to Phone Audio, and follow the directions provided. If you would like to submit questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A box. For Zoom technical questions, you can email meetings@erg.com, which I'll put in the chat shortly, or type something into the chat box. Also, if you would like to make additional comments beyond what's discussed today, please go to the Accessible Trails for All website and submit a comment. I'll be putting the link to that into the chat in a moment as well. We'll be using breakout rooms for during this meeting. Our interpreters can't go into the breakout rooms, so they'll be staying in the main room and we'll be having a discussion here. If you are using interpretation, please write interpretation into the chat box, and I'll make sure that you stay in the main room. If I accidentally assign you to a breakout room and you are using interpretation, you will be able to leave and return to the main room. To ensure that there's a good mix of folks in each breakout room, we are asking attendees to add tags to their name. The tags are on the presentation, such as trail user, trail builder, government/nonprofit, and other. Please use whichever tag best describes you or your organization. You should be able to rename yourself by clicking on the participants button, hovering over your name, and then hitting rename. That's all I have for Zoom housekeeping, so now I'm going to turn it over to Paul Janaji.
Thank you, Kessel. Thanks everybody for coming tonight. My name is Paul Janegy. I'm the director of the Massachusetts Office of Outdoor Recreation, or MORE. And I want to welcome everybody tonight on behalf of Governor Healy and Environmental Secretary Rebecca Tepper. At MORE, our goal is to promote all things outdoor recreation in Massachusetts. More importantly, though, we want to make Massachusetts one of the most welcoming, inclusive, diverse, and accessible places to enjoy the outdoors. That's why this Trails for All initiative is so important. Before being at the Office of Outdoor Recreation, I worked for about 20 years at DCR, building, permitting, designing trails, many trails to accessible standards or somewhat accessible standards. But I have to be honest with everybody tonight, I didn't get it. I didn't understand how important accessible trails are for so many people. Truthfully, I still don't get it. That's why this initiative is important, and that's why I'm here focusing on listening, learning, and doing the work. So I really appreciate every one of you who is here tonight, and also those who aren't here tonight but are here joining us on this journey along the way. I appreciate those of you who are here involved in building and maintaining trails, and I want to thank you for being here to listen and engage and do the work. And I want to really thank those people who have lived experience with disabling conditions for being here and sharing your experiences and ideas. Tonight, we will, this is our welcome and introduction, and then we will we will have a few interactive poll questions to kick us off, and then we'll move to a short presentation on the Trails for All initiative, what it is, what our objectives are, etc. But then we'll spend the bulk of tonight focused on breakout groups where we want to hear from all of you. That'll be from 6:30 to 7:30, and then at 7:30 we'll do a report back and cover next steps. And with that, I think I am kicking off to Shane.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Kessel, would you be able to put those poll questions up on the screen? Great, so we have a little interactive poll to kick us off. This question is, do you recreate on accessible hiking or strolling trails? And the options are yes, regularly, yes, occasionally, no, I'm familiar with accessible trails but don't use them or don't use them often. And lastly, no, I'm not familiar with accessible trails, or I'm not sure if I've ever used an accessible trail. So if you're able to select an option, you can do that. Or if you'd like to say your selection out loud, one of the facilitators can complete the poll for you. Okay, give it just one more minute. It's great to see that right now, 30% of people who've responded regularly use accessible trails. Okay, so yes, 31% of people in the meeting regularly use accessible trails, 40% occasionally use accessible trails, 22% are familiar with them but don't use them or use them often, and 7% are not familiar with accessible trails or not sure if they've ever used one. So it's great to have such a mix of experiences in the room, and I'm particularly excited about the 7% that are not familiar with accessible trails because hopefully you'll learn something tonight. Kessel, could you put the next question up on the screen? Oh, I'm sorry, I just realized I didn't press share results, so I'm sorry if you weren't seeing those, but I'll do that for the next one. So this question is, how would you describe your use of accessible hiking or strolling trails? I depend on accessible trails for access to nature. I use both accessible and inaccessible trails and sometimes depend on accessible trails for access. I don't depend on accessible trails for access, but use both accessible and inaccessible. or I design or build accessible trails. I utilize trails for professional reasons, such as hosting outdoor programs or events. Lastly, I don't use, or I'm not sure if I've used an accessible trail. Okay. I'm going to end this poll, I think. Okay, and this time I'll share the results. So hopefully everyone can see those. So it's again, a really healthy mix of people, 20% who depend on accessible trails for access to nature. 7% who use both types of trails and sometimes depend on accessible trails. 52% who don't depend but use both of them. 25 who design or build. 16 who use them for professional reasons, and 8% who don't use them. So again, just really great to have you all here tonight. I'm hopeful we can have a really productive conversation with as much experience in the room. Okay, and Kessel, can you put up the last one? Thanks. So are any of the below statements true for you? Select all that apply. I identify as having a disability. I have experienced periods of limited mobility or disabling conditions in the past, but do not currently identify as having a disability. I do not have a disability, but I have a family member or loved one with a disability or limited mobility, or none of the above. Okay, and I'll end the poll. So 25% of our attendees tonight identify as having a disability, and another 27 have experienced limited mobility or disabling conditions in the past. And 48% have a family member or loved one with a disability, and 14% say none of the above. So thank you all for taking those polls so we can get a sense of who's in the room with us tonight. And now I will pass it off to Peter.
And I think I was going to do some of the first slides. Can you advance?
Oh, I'm
to the next
sorry.
slide?
I'm sorry. You're right. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Paul.
So Paul Janighi again from Massachusetts Office of Outdoor Recreation, and we just wanted to go through a little bit of background on the Trails for All initiative. So what is the Trails for All initiative? It aims to create universally accessible trails in Massachusetts through intentional trail planning that removes barriers to access and brings the outdoors to individuals of all abilities via trail improvements. These kinds of improvements include things like grades, stable surfaces, inclusive signage, visual aids, and information about trails. Next slide. So our objectives in this initiative are to identify the full range of trail experiences that are desired. So moving beyond just a short standard accessible trail experience to what's the full range that we're trying to provide. We want to identify critical barriers to providing that range of accessible experiences in natural environments. We want to identify the resources necessary to provide that range of accessible experiences in Massachusetts, whether those are human resources, information, knowledge, funding, etc. We also, very importantly, we are engaging in this effort not by, but with individuals with lived experience with disabling conditions. And it's our objective to cultivate a culture of recognition that accessible trails can't be made without input and partnership with those with lived experience with disabilities. So what kinds of trails are we talking about in this effort? Well, we're really talking about all kinds of trails, but we're focusing primarily on natural surface trails within natural areas. So we're focusing more on those natural trails, natural surface trails in natural areas, less so on the paved pathways or rail trails, or those, although those are still really important for accessibility. We're also looking at other kinds of adaptive trail uses, whether that's adaptive cycling or skiing or things like that. And also, very importantly, the idea of blue trails and accessible put-ins for things like kayaking and paddling and boating to take advantage of the power that those natural areas provide for everyone. Now I think I'm kicking it over to Peter.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Flinker. I'm part of the consulting team that's going to be working with Paul and the Office of Outdoor Recreation over the next year. And one of the things we're trying to do is really define what is an accessible trail, what makes it accessible, and to what extent can we make all trails accessible. And we're sort of starting with, what are the different features of a trail that describe the levels of accessibility? And beyond that, how do we sort of describe and differentiate different kinds of trails? So this is the start of that process, which is really looking at different factors that really fall along a range or a continuum. For instance, length from long to short, surfacing from hard concrete or asphalt trails to compacted soil or more natural surface trails, width from narrow to wide, features like benches or interpretive signage, maybe trails with none or minimal and others with more extensive. Engagement, which sort of refers to, is this a trail that you experience on your own, or does it have some facilitation or program elements that you go and are guided by people? And what's the context? Is it urban or more natural or remote? Is it flat or steep? Would you have to have a powered equipment or a lever-operated device to use it? Is it quiet or noisy? Is it crowded or uncrowded? Is it free or completely open to the public for no fee or for a fee? Are there restrooms or no restrooms? And does it provide other features like non-visual wayfinding and interpretation or signage or guide ropes that make it open to people with visual impairments? And then is it connected to public transit? Can you get there, or is it completely dependent on arriving on an automobile? And the next slide sort of shows one of the things we're thinking about it, which is the difference between access and accessibility. So access is, can you get to a trail? Is there transportation? Can you find it? Do you know that it's actually there? What are the hours of operation? Do they fit the time that you have available? And then once you get there, is it accessible? And that's more the traditional, is it stable, not too steep, not too narrow? Are there resting areas and so on? So we're really looking at this whole, again, the sort of continuum from, can you get there? Does it have the features that support you when you're there? And can you actually use it? And then what's the experience once you're on the trail? So the next slide is looking at why this is important, which is by some measures, 50% of Massachusetts residents can benefit right now from accessible trails. So this chart on the left sort of breaks that down. 19% of people in Massachusetts are over age 65. Obviously, they're not all disabled, but to some extent, as you age, of course, you are less able to take a more rugged trail, and a lot of people can use something that's more accessible. And then you have people under age 5, which is kind of an arbitrary cutoff, but obviously children can benefit from a trail which is more accessible. And then you have people with recognized disabilities, which for people under age 65 ranges from 12 to 25%, depending on which data you use and how you describe disabilities. It's probably closer to 25%, and the total, therefore, is probably closer to 50%. But we do know, as shown on the right, that over 28% of adults nationally have a disabling condition, and 26% of adults in Massachusetts, including mobility, visual, auditory, or cognitive disabilities, totaling almost 1.5 million people. The next slide, Shane. So, and as I said, 44% of adults over 65 identifying as having a disability. And we know that Massachusetts, as most states across the country, is getting older on average. And that's sort of two factors in Massachusetts. One is last year, AARP identified Massachusetts as the #1 destination for retirement. And then we're naturally, just as the baby boomers get older, there's a bulge of population nationally that's becoming more than 65 years old. And that's projected to increase through 2030 from 15% to more than 21% of the total population. Meanwhile, an interest in outdoor recreation among older adults is growing. People who are over 65 now, they grew up being more active than previous generations, and they continue to be, with almost 40% of people 65 plus participating in outdoor recreation in 2023. Next slide, please. And it's particularly important. One of the things we really are focused on with this project is something that trails do that no other form of recreation does, which is bring you out in direct contact with nature. And obviously some trails do that better than others. And one of the things we want to talk about tonight is what does access to nature mean? If you're going along a very hard surface paved trail, is that the same as a soft surface trail where you're closer to nature literally? And what really provides the values as written here of increased well-being and reduction of stress. We do know that the more natural environment, the greater the stress reducing benefit in general. Next slide. And we know that this is particularly important for people with disabilities, who are 33% more likely to have stress-related illnesses than their non-mobility limited peers. So again, access to nature is really important. Trails are one of the few ways you can really get out in nature. And there's a growing demand for access to sort of stress reduction in nature recreation across the state. Meanwhile, Massachusetts in 2023 spent $23.5 billion on preventable healthcare costs. And so there's a big economic value to reducing some of that stress across the state. And it has been estimated that spending $1 on trails can save $3 in medical costs. So over the next year, we're going to be doing more research, pulling together the best information we can across the country and really trying to define these economic benefits, the social and medical benefits, so that we're all literally on the same page and can help use that to support construction of accessible trails across the state. The next slide talks a little bit about another part of it, which is just the fact that Massachusetts is the fastest growing outdoor recreation industry in the nation, amounting to $13.2 billion in 2023. Very significant growth, 73% growth since 2012, 13% growth even in the 22 to 2023 season. And within that, the accessible adaptive travel is a growing market, valued at $58.7 billion in 2020, with continued growth expected. Next slide, please. So meanwhile, the other thing we're looking at is what trails exist now and how accessible are they? Sort of preliminary inventory indicates that of 4,000 miles of unpaved trails and state parks, only 7.5 miles are accessible, only 0.2%. And overall, including all trails, not just in the state parks, less than only 0.5% of soft surface trails in Massachusetts are accessible. So there's definitely fairly limited supply of accessible trails, especially trails that are directly out in nature in the state parks and other venues. And then the next slide shows how these trails are not well distributed across the state. They're sort of clustered in sort of the greater Boston area, in the Connecticut Valley, and in the Berkshires. And in between these areas, there's vast areas of open space with no accessible trails. So we're really looking at not just what does it take to make a trail accessible, but can people get there? And is it close enough to where people live to really have significant access? So in conclusion, the next slide, trails aren't optional. They're essential infrastructure for health and well-being for everyone. They're particularly important for people with disabilities and others with mobility challenges who have a right to enjoy public and natural spaces and access to nature as well as anyone. And so the question is, how can we improve trail accessibility across Massachusetts? And that's what we want to talk about tonight. So Shane is going to lead us into our group exercises.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So, Kessel, do you have our breakout groups queued up? Do you need another minute?
We should be looking good. I just like to remind anyone who's using an interpretation room to say interpretation in the chat. And if I missed it for some reason, you should be able to leave your breakout room. So that's all I have.
Great. So in just a moment, you are going to be sent into a breakout room with a facilitator. And the facilitator is going to guide you through a about 16-minute conversation. And let's see, we have 94 participants. So yeah, Kessel, I think an even split between the rooms is perfect. So that's great. I hope you enjoy your conversations, and at 7:30, we'll bring you back into the main room and we'll have a brief report out and then close out for the evening.
I guess one question before we do that, if people have questions, meanwhile, should they put those in the chat?
Yes, you could put them in the chat.
Or there is actually a question and answer button. If you don't see it at the bottom of your screen, it should be hidden somewhere under more. So if you do have a question, since we're going to be going back and forth between the groups, and it would be helpful if you could type your question into the question and answer, or of course, bring it up in your group when we get there.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I think we're ready.
All right, I'm about to launch the rooms, but if you have any questions, technical issues, again, you should be able to come back to the main room and I will help you out. So with that, here we go.
Okay, I think we have everyone back. So hello, everyone. Hope you had enjoyable and productive conversation. Just going to ask the facilitators to just share a brief, maybe top 3 highlights, if they can, from their group or main themes of their discussion. And would any facilitator volunteer to kick us off?
I can go.
Thanks, Helena.
So our group was incredibly insightful. I'm trying to find my notes here. So the opportunities that came through the conversation in my group were beginning with grassroots networking, and there's a lot of enthusiasm based on the fact that this is a statewide conversation we're having in this moment, and it represents a significant amount of grassroots interest, and that's a latent strength and resource for this work. So that's a huge opportunity to move forward by building upon the interest and knowledge that exists within people's communities. Participants in my group noted there's opportunities that anyone can move forward for making projects happen, from using CPA funds or local cultural council funds and mass trails funds to propose a project, and flagging that the blue trails and accessible put-ins are very special, and highlighting that it's just so special and important having access to nature for all people. The last two things from our group were about communicating and promoting the awareness of accessible trails so that people can utilize them. You can't utilize it if you don't know it's there. So we need to make sure that people are aware and are able to access. And that's an opportunity. And the last thing was we want to make sure we're hearing from a broad cross-section of people that represent all the different forms of disability, and that the word accessible reflects not just a certain type of surfacing on a trail, but it is truly accessible to all people. And we want to have that conversation and learn what universal accessibility means. So those were the key points from group 7.
Thank you.
I can go.
Thanks.
So one of our opportunities was increasing access to information just about the trail conditions and about what to expect when you get there, but also, like Helena just said, the publicity about knowing about the trails exists. Amenities that are accessible, having them at the trail, like toilets, is really important. Wi-Fi, we heard, is really important too, to be able to use adaptive equipment for people that are visually impaired or hard of hearing. And then maintenance, to make sure that those amenities remain accessible for people. And then something that I thought was really interesting is there was a desire for this to create a network of accessible trail builders and contractors, and creating spaces for them to have conversations together and with people with disabilities, like we're doing tonight, about accessible trails and what would be most helpful in types of challenges and opportunities.
Thanks. Great.
I'm happy to chime in next. So we had a really wonderful conversation, and there were some things that, definitely relate to the previous group's ideas, and a few things that were beyond those. We had 3 kind of big categories of opportunities. First is information, both at the beginning of trails to identify potential upcoming things in the trail, like hazards, rest stops, steep grades for initial decision making, signage throughout the trail, to and accessible signage to identify things like drainage tips or structures that might create issues within the trail, and then information beyond, like out in the community, to help locate accessible trails. Another big category was networks, to sort of support connecting with, say, a buddy to go out into nature, as well as networks for transportation. So recognizing that there are some areas that have real gaps in transportation networks, and potentially the opportunity to provide vouchers for free or reduced rideshare services to trails. And then a third, which is relatively inexpensive, discrete infrastructure at trails, like bathrooms and trash for folks using guide dogs in particular, and then shade, rest areas, and or rest spots and hydration.
I can go next. So we had a really great conversation in the group that I was in, and one of the things that I really appreciated was the information sharing that was happening within the group, with people connecting with each other and hearing what other people knew, and it seemed like it was going to be useful in people's everyday lives. So beyond that, we talked a lot about just what makes trails accessible. People talked about things like having adequate passing, having good surfacing, having adequate bathrooms, having olfactory cues, having trails that work for all different types of disabilities. So not just mobility disabilities, but also sight and so on. When we talked about access to trails, it seemed like basic physical access was transportation was a key challenge and something that needed to be addressed. Talking about not just transportation to the site, but then also getting from a parking area to the start of the trail and surfacing for parking being often a big barrier. Talked about different organizations that are out there that do help address access issues, both in terms of transportation, but also in terms of equipment access, so that people can try out different equipment, try out different modes of travel, and see whether those work for them before they spend a lot of money on very expensive equipment. Talked about accessible bathrooms being really important, and in addition, changing tables for people who are larger than toddler sized, being a barrier for some people. We talked about whether there needs to be a statewide standard for sort of the level of accessibility, and that generally there needs to be better information of what's out there that's specific enough so that people can make decisions for themselves about whether the trail is going to work for them or not. In terms of moving towards sort of implementation, cost came up as a huge barrier. Sort of bureaucracy and cooperation was a barrier, a lack of information sharing sort of between organizations and across states, and the sense that sort of everybody is doing it on their own and there isn't a lot of coordination, and everybody should be working together and learning from each other. And then in terms of opportunities, one person said that there are a lot of trails that could be accessible with just minimal work, and we should figure out what those are and eliminate the barriers, rather than focusing on brand new trails from the ground up. Just let's be kind of tactical, and eliminate all the small barriers first. Talked about the idea of a rating system again, talked about information sharing being really important, equipment sharing being important, and then, you know, can these things be done at kind of a grassroots level, with kind of like a wiki rail trading system or something where people with lived experience are evaluating trails and sharing information that's doesn't need to be honest, doesn't need to be fancy, just needs to be honest and clear. Anybody from my group, did I miss anything that you really think is important? All right, thank you.
Go next. We had a great discussion in our group, and really interesting, we sort of started the discussion with somebody who said that they built and designed accessible trails, but recently have started to experience a mobility limitation and have realized that their trails don't have enough benches for them. They're not frequent enough, and they need to be closer together. We talked about width of trails. Trails need to be wide enough, needing to know the rules about what type of equipment is allowed on a trail if it's a mobility device and what might not be. Really needing trail access information. to be able to know where to go, what type of energy might be required, if you're doing all the planning to go outside and taking all the energy to go outside, what type of a space is it and where is it? Needing a statewide map for trails came up a lot. And we talked about how bathrooms are really important for a variety of folks, and how that isn't just necessarily folks only with mobility needs, but all types of folks, people who are experiencing chronic illness or GI issues, or who have just had children, and older folks, so all sorts of people. We talked about how state funding and state resources are right now not able to adequately help and meet the needs of smaller communities, and how there really needs to be at least one trail in every community. But in order to do that, they need funding sources and they need support. And it was talked about and suggested that we have dedicated a lot of resources to rail trails, and it would be great to have the same type of fund available for accessible trails. Maybe some assistance in designing and implementing trails for communities that don't have them or that are smaller. The need to market trails in a way that also shows the diversity of user, so people know that they are welcome in that space and that that space is for them. We talked about how some folks don't want or need a network of accessible trails, but other folks actually would love a network of accessible trails, to have a longer experience and a more diverse experience. Getting to trails came up a lot, the need for both parking and public transportation to accessible trails. We talked about opportunities to expand, identifying communities that don't have trails and trying to help them. What else? That being active on a grassroots level can help make a big difference, and that people talking about this issue is making a difference, and mapping out the gaps that we do have in the system to help and try to bring more trails to more folks.
I can go. That's good. Our group had a great icebreaker that resulted in everyone learning about new trails that they want to go visit. So that was great to hear and establish those connections. I'll just be very brief. One of the top themes was really that there's not a one size fits all. People that have disabling conditions are not all one size, and they want a variety of types of trail experiences. So, you know, keeping our minds broad, not just narrowing the definition of an accessible trail to be one thing is really important. Similar to what others share, there needs to be adequate and accurate information about trails. A lot of times it might be communicated that a trail is accessible and it's not. When people have made plans, they're meeting people and they get to a site that they can't use, it's a real disappointment. So having that real-time feedback is important. And something that I think another group did, no one has mentioned yet, but we had a little bit of a conversation about e-bikes and how they can be both a safety hazard and an enabling technology that allows people with limited mobility to do more. So there's kind of two sides to that equation. And obviously a lot of it has to do with trail etiquette and people following the rules of the trails. I think that's it. There was a lot more, but I want to stay on time.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. I can share briefly. So I had one person in my group, and they work with patients, and they often will take their patients out on trails because they spend most of their time in a community house. And it's their patients love the opportunity to get outside, get some fresh air, enjoy flowers and plants, and they ask to put their feet in water. And it's she said it's just a really important activity for her patients to have access to. She said that she does have some accessible trails near her that she's able to take her patients who use wheelchairs there, but not all trails are accessible. In that it would be helpful to have handrails and more trails because her patients sometimes want to leave their wheelchairs in the car, but they do need some assistance in walking. And she said it would be great to have water like stations along trails so people can rehydrate, in shady spots so people can cool down. And then she also said, you know, she has a son who has autism, and sometimes she worries about him near water bodies, and she'd like to see in natural spaces having more safety monitoring, either whether that's personnel or technology monitoring in risky areas, because if someone who's using a tracking device is in water and the tracking device falls off, that's a big risk that worries her. So she wanted more safety and I guess, yeah, more guardrails against in risky areas and lifeguards. And I will pass it to whoever's next.
I can go next, thanks. We also had a great group and a great discussion. A lot of the points that have already been said were shared. I'll just highlight a few. Information was over and over again, but a couple of things. One, a statewide clearinghouse where folks can go to find information about accessible trails and opportunities, and also making sure that information includes discussion of, are there benches, is there drinking water, and are there bathrooms. Maintenance came up, more than regular maintenance, and also the idea of having some kind of opportunity for users to report maintenance needs in real time. We talked about the idea that accessibility does not always mean easy, and that challenge and barrier are different things. There are people who are looking for challenging opportunities in natural spaces and with adaptive equipment. But then when something becomes a barrier, that can negatively affect that. We talked about needing standards to know how to build, what standards to build trails to, and not just one standard, but sort of a range of standards depending on the type of trail and accessibility we're shooting for. And then we talked about opportunities for making sure that people with lived experience are included in employment positions of management and maintenance and design. That there are various partnerships that can be important, particularly with different recreational user communities. And then the need to advocate, and keep coming back and advocating. So those are some of the highlights.
I could jump in. Shane, are you keeping track of who? Have we been through everybody pretty much?
I think you might be the last one.
All right. Well, I guess being the last one, I can reflect that everything I think I've been hearing in the roundup here, I think we talked about in our group, but some of the key sort of opportunities people identified toward the end was the importance of information sharing, both information to environmental justice communities and others who may not know about trails or outdoor recreation opportunities, as well as information for cities and towns who just don't understand what their responsibilities are, or if they do want to build accessible trails, they don't know how to do it. I think another key opportunity was leveraging things that towns are already doing to integrate accessible trails and recreation at all levels. So open space plans and other plans should focus intentionally on accessible trails. Volunteer trail building activities, which a lot of towns do every year. They have crews of people who are involved and eager to build trails, to integrate accessible trail construction into that, scout projects and so on. And then the third thing is sort of focusing on trails as an economic development opportunity, both for businesses who will benefit from having more visitors and people enjoying recreation in town, and businesses that support trail accessibility. So providing the adaptive equipment, running events, and giving people an opportunity again to find out what's possible.
Thanks. And I realize Rachel, actually, we haven't heard from yet.
which I was saying to Shane is fine because I usually talk a lot. And now that I'm going last, so much of what our group talked about has already been covered. But some things that came up a lot that I wanted to highlight were experience, right? Thinking about the trail experience. What are you seeing? What's going on? What type of challenges are there, right? They have different levels of challenge. And then providing that information to people, letting them know not only what is the surface of the trail like, what are the slopes like, but what does it feel like, right? What are you doing when you're on the trail? One of the quotes from that part that I really liked is pavement is painful, which I thought in a lot of ways, right? And so how can you have trails that connect you to different experiences in nature, and things that you're seeing and things that you're hearing and smelling too. Another thing that came up quite frequently was public transportation, the challenge of using that to get to trails. How do you connect from the bus stop to the trailhead? And the benefit of staff. So the staff people on the trail, being able to connect with them to do to things like report, hey, there's a tree down, to ask them questions, to call beforehand to say, hey, is the trail still in good condition? And to get that support for maybe you need help getting to the trailhead and then you can enjoy the trail independently, and being able to rely on them to do the maintenance and then also provide that connection for you to get access to the trail. And then the silos between different trail organizations, towns, people building these resources, that there's not good ways for them to connect with each other, for them to connect with users, and a need for sort of project management experience, right? How do you've got lots of volunteers, you've got resources, people that want to make these happen, but what are the resources to really give you that roadmap of how to make your trail a reality? That was group 9.
Great. Wow, so much great conversation. Thank you all for joining us tonight again and for bringing such great ideas. We have quickly put together a poll, which just is kind of trying to roughly capture some of the themes we just heard from the breakout groups. So Kessel, could you share that in the chat? You have that up?
Should be in there, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so there's a link in the chat, and we'll also, Dylan will share his screen with this poll up. So you can take this poll either by going to this website in the chat, menti.com, with a lot of letters and numbers after it. Or,
Shane,
yeah,
for those of us who are challenged, where should we look for the chat?
on the bottom of this, on your Zoom screen, there's a chat button, the little speech bubble icon. And then Dylan is sharing his screen, and there's a QR code in the corner, so you could scan that code with the camera on your phone. Or you could, at the top, it says join@menti.com, and there's a code that you can use. And I can read out that code. The code is 3380084.
And I have to say, we just put this together and it misses a whole lot of what you all talked about tonight. So we're just trying to put it into some quick buckets, and I apologize for all the really important things that are left out. But we're getting some hearts. That's nice. Oh, more hearts.
And while everyone does that, I'm putting in the chat another message, which is just an opportunity for follow-up comments. If you have anything that you didn't get to express tonight that you want to tell us, there's a comment page on the Trails for All webpage. And if you click the link in the chat, you can enter a comment, or you can email us at info@dodsonflinker.com. And our next public forum will be September 15th. And so that will sort of be a part 2 to this forum. And our our team is going to go continue doing research and talking to people and looking at trails. And then in September, we'll be able to present some preliminary findings, and we would love for you to join us at that as well. And you can find information about that at the Trails for All website. And now I can read out what we're seeing in the poll. So again, the question that you're responding to are, what are the biggest opportunities to improve and expand the trail network? So the top one is information sharing, with 19 people saying that's the biggest opportunity, followed by more funding with 17 people. And then access to trails and bathrooms at trails has 6, and technical assistance and design assistance has 6. And lastly, social networks and organizations has 3.
Yep, just got another vote for access to trails and bathrooms at trails. Kind of a funny mush there, but
yeah, bathrooms is rising in the ranks.
all right.
All right. Well, thank you all again so much for joining us. It's 8 p.m., so I want to let you go. But again, please feel free to reach out with any follow-up comments or feedback on how we could have made this meeting more accessible. We're happy to hear any feedback. And thank you again. Paul, Peter, would you like to say anything else?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for their time. Thank all the facilitators tonight and the language translators as well. And most importantly, all the participants. So see you in September.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you. Stay weird.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. This was
Thank
great.
you, everyone.